Hell's Angel finds a poor girl crying at his son's grave. The truth shocked everyone. The rain fell in steady sheets, drumming against the worn leather of Jimmy Reaper Dawson's jacket. He stood motionless before the simple granite headstone, his weathered face creased with pain. The carved letters of his son's name, Tommy Dawson, seemed to mock him, a constant reminder of his failures as a father. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have been there more, should have done better by you." The cemetery was deserted, just how Jimmy liked it. The rows of headstones stretched out under gray skies, peaceful in their solitude. But today was different. A small sound caught his attention, a whimper barely audible over the pattering rain. Jimmy turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a tiny figure huddled by Tommy's grave. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, sat cross-legged on the wet grass. Her clothes were worn and dirty, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain. She was crying, her small shoulders shaking with each sob. Something in Jimmy's chest tightened. He'd spent years building walls around his heart, but the sight of this child broke through them like they were made of paper. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, trying to keep his voice gentle. "You shouldn't be out here in the rain." The girl looked up, her wide eyes red from crying. She didn't seem frightened of him, despite his intimidating appearance. "I miss him," she said simply, her voice small but clear. Jimmy frowned, taking a careful step closer. "Who do you miss, sweetheart?" "My daddy." She touched the headstone with tiny fingers. "Tommy always said he'd come back to take care of me." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jimmy's feet. He staggered slightly, steadying himself against a nearby headstone. What did you say?" "Tommy was my daddy," she repeated, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I'm Lucy." Jimmy's mind raced. Tommy had never mentioned having a child. But as he looked at Lucy more closely, he saw it. Tommy's gentle eyes, the same curve of the nose. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Your daddy," Jimmy's voice cracked. "He never told me about you." Lucy shrugged, a gesture too old for her young shoulders. "Mommy said he wanted to tell you, but he was scared." Jimmy sank to his knees in the wet grass, not caring about the mud soaking through his jeans. "Who's your mama, Lucy?" "Sarah Mitchell," she said, and Jimmy felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Sarah, the woman he'd loved and left 25 years ago, when he was young and stupid and more concerned with his reputation in the Hell's Angels than anything else. "Where's your mama now?" he asked, dreading the answer. "She went to heaven," Lucy whispered. "Like Daddy did." Rain mixed with the tears on Jimmy's face as he looked at this little girl, his granddaughter. She was alone in the world, just like him. Without thinking, he shrugged off his leather jacket and wrapped it around her tiny shoulders. "You're soaked through, little one," he said, his voice gentle. "How about we get you somewhere warm and dry?" Lucy looked up at him, studying his face with those familiar eyes. "Are you my grandpa?" Jimmy's throat tightened. "Yeah, Lucy, I reckon I am." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her small fingers were ice cold against his calloused palm. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. Jimmy's small house felt different with Lucy in it. The worn leather couch and scarred coffee table seemed out of place now that a child occupied the space. Lucy sat quietly, her wet shoes leaving small puddles on the floor. Her clothes were threadbare, and she hugged herself against the chill. "Let me get you something warm," Jimmy said, his gruff voice softer than usual. He disappeared into his bedroom, and returned with an old sweatshirt of Tommy's that he'd never been able to throw away. "Here, kid, put this on before you catch cold." The sweatshirt swallowed Lucy whole, but she snuggled into it, breathing in deeply. "It smells like him," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes again. Jimmy's throat tightened. He busied himself in the kitchen, warming up some soup he found in the cupboard. His hands shook as he poured it into a bowl. When he returned, Lucy had curled up in the corner of the couch, looking impossibly small. "Tommy," Lucy started, then stopped. She spooned some soup into her mouth, her movements careful and precise. "Tommy used to make me soup too, when Mom was working late." Jimmy sat heavily in his old armchair. "Tell me about him," he managed to say. "About you and your mom." Lucy's eyes brightened slightly. "He came to see us every weekend. He'd bring me books and read to me. Mom said he was the best dad anyone could ask for." She paused, stirring her soup. "He promised he'd always take care of us. But then..." Her voice trailed off, and Jimmy felt the familiar stab of grief. He remembered the motorcycle accident that took Tommy's life, the call that had shattered his world. Now he realized it had shattered more lives than just his own. "Where's your mom now?" Jimmy asked gently. "She got sick last month. Really sick." Lucy's lower lip trembled. "The neighbors took care of me for a while, but they couldn't anymore. I remembered Tommy showing me where he..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Jimmy ran a rough hand over his face. His past life as a Hell's Angel seemed a million miles away from this moment. The man who had terrorized rivals and lived by his own brutal code now sat across from a little girl who needed help. His granddaughter. "Listen, Lucy," he said, leaning forward. "I know I'm probably not what you expected, but I want to help. Would you be okay staying here while I figure things out?" Lucy nodded slowly. "Tommy told me about you sometimes. He said you were tough on the outside, but good on the inside. Like a coconut." Despite everything, Jimmy felt a small smile tug at his lips. That sounded like Tommy, always trying to find the good in people, even in his old man. "I'll make up the spare room for you," Jimmy said, standing up. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry." As he gathered blankets and pillows, Jimmy's mind raced. He needed to verify Lucy's story, find out about her mother, make proper arrangements. But most of all, he needed to understand how his son had kept such a huge secret from him. Then again, given their complicated relationship, maybe it wasn't so surprising after all. Looking at Lucy finishing her soup, Jimmy felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A sense of purpose. She needed protection, care, and stability. He owed it to Tommy to provide that, no matter what his past life might say about it. Jimmy's hands trembled as he opened the cardboard box marked "Tommy's Things" in faded black marker. Dust particles danced in the afternoon light streaming through his apartment window. The box had sat untouched in his closet since the funeral, too painful to face until now. He pulled out a worn leather jacket, Tommy's favorite. The leather was soft from years of wear, and Jimmy could almost see his son wearing it, that crooked smile on his face. His throat tightened as he ran his fingers over the patches Tommy had sewn on himself. From the living room came the soft sound of Lucy humming to herself as she colored. The girl hadn't said much since arriving at his place yesterday, but she seemed to find comfort in the simple activity. Jimmy had bought her some crayons and coloring books first thing this morning, not knowing what else to do for a 6-year-old. Digging deeper into the box, Jimmy found an envelope he didn't recognize. His heart skipped when he saw the handwriting on the front. Sarah's handwriting. Tommy's mother. His first real love before the Hell's Angels consumed his life. With shaking fingers, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. "Dear Tommy, I know you're angry that I never told you everything about your father. Jimmy wasn't always the man you came to know. When we first met, he was different, kind, gentle even. But the club changed him, pulled him deeper into that life until I barely recognized him anymore. I was already pregnant when he left, though I never told him. Maybe that was wrong of me, but I was young and scared, and he was becoming someone I didn't know anymore, someone dangerous. You've grown into such a wonderful man, Tommy. So different from your father. The way you've stepped up to help Lucy and her mother shows the kind of heart you have. Your promise to protect that little girl. It makes me proud to be your mother. I should have told you everything sooner. Maybe then. The letter ended abruptly. Jimmy's vision blurred as he stared at the unfinished words. Sarah must have written this shortly before she passed away 5 years ago. She'd never gotten to finish it, never gotten to fully explain. He pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears. All these years, he'd convinced himself that walking away had been the right thing to do, that Sarah was better off without him, safer without him. But he'd abandoned her when she was carrying his child. And now here was Lucy, another innocent caught in the wake of his mistakes. From the other room came the sound of paper tearing, followed by a small oops. Jimmy quickly wiped his eyes and tucked the letter into his pocket. "You okay out there, kiddo?" he called, his voice rougher than usual. "I ripped my picture," Lucy replied softly. Jimmy walked into the living room, grateful for the distraction from his churning thoughts. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor, holding 2 pieces of paper together and frowning at the tear. Looking at her now, this tiny, vulnerable girl who shared his blood, Jimmy felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He'd failed Sarah. He'd failed Tommy. The guilt of those failures threatened to overwhelm him. But maybe, just maybe, he could do right by Lucy. He had to try, at least. He owed that much to Tommy, to Sarah, and most of all, to this innocent child who had already lost so much. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Jimmy's living room window as he sat in his worn leather armchair, Tommy's letter clutched in his weathered hands. In the kitchen, Lucy hummed softly while coloring at the table. The sound made his chest tight with a mix of worry and something warmer, something he hadn't felt in years. A heavy knock at the door made Jimmy's head snap up. His muscles tensed automatically. Old habits died hard. "Lucy, honey, stay in the kitchen, okay?" "Okay, Jimmy," she answered, not looking up from her drawing. Jimmy moved silently to the door, checking through the peephole. His jaw clenched at the sight of Snake, a former brother from his hellsangels days. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door just enough to block the view inside. "Been a while, Reaper," Snake said, using Jimmy's old road name. His leather vest was worn, but the patches were still bright, marking him as an active member. "Heard some interesting rumors." "Not interested in rumors anymore," Jimmy replied flatly. "That life's behind me." Snake's thin lips curved into an unfriendly smile. "Maybe, but word travels fast when someone like you suddenly takes in a little girl. People get curious, especially people who remember Tommy's mother." Jimmy's hand tightened on the doorframe. "What's your point?" "The point is, brother, that some folks think that girl might be worth something. A lot of something, actually." Snake leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Tommy's mother had secrets, big ones. And if that little girl is who people think she is, she might be the key to finding what Sarah left behind." The mention of Sarah's name hit Jimmy like a physical blow. He remembered her fierce spirit, how she'd fought to make a better life for Tommy after Jimmy abandoned them. What secrets could she have had? "I'm not playing games, Snake. Whatever you think you know." "This ain't a game, Reaper." Snake's friendly facade dropped. Things are already in motion. You really think you can protect her? You're soft now. Living in this nice little house, playing daddy to a kid you just met? From the kitchen came the sound of Lucy singing to herself, innocent and unaware. Jimmy felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. "Listen carefully," Jimmy said, his voice dropping to the dangerous growl that had once made prospects tremble. "If anyone comes near that little girl, they'll learn real quick that I ain't as soft as they think. Clear?" Snake held up his hands, but his eyes were cold. "Just delivering a friendly warning, brother. For old time's sake, watch your back." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Reaper? The club sends their regards." Jimmy closed the door, his mind racing. He moved to the kitchen doorway, watching Lucy concentrate on her drawing, her small face peaceful. She looked up and smiled at him. Tommy's smile, and his heart clenched. Walking to the window, Jimmy scanned the street, noting a motorcycle slowly cruising past. They were watching. Already, his past was catching up, threatening to destroy the fragile peace he'd found. Looking at Lucy again, Jimmy made a silent vow. He wouldn't fail her like he'd failed Sarah and Tommy. Whatever secrets were buried in the past, whatever danger was coming, he would protect her, even if it meant becoming the Reaper again. Jimmy sat at his kitchen table, staring at his laptop screen. The gentle tapping of rain against the window matched the rhythm of his fingers on the keyboard. In the next room, Lucy slept peacefully on the couch, clutching a worn teddy bear they'd found in Tommy's old things. He rubbed his tired eyes, fighting against the headache building behind them. 3 hours of searching through online records had left him drained, but he couldn't stop. He needed answers about Lucy's family, about her mother, about everything that had happened while he wasn't there. "Come on," he muttered, scrolling through another news article. His weathered hands, covered in old tattoos that told stories of his darker days, trembled slightly as he typed in another search term. Then he found it. The article headline hit him like a punch to the gut. "Local woman dies in highway accident." The photo showed a familiar face, older than he remembered, but unmistakably Sarah, Lucy's mother. His throat tightened as he read the details of the crash. A rainy night, a slippery road, a truck that couldn't stop in time. "6 months ago," Jimmy whispered, his voice rough with emotion. He glanced toward the living room where Lucy slept. No wonder the poor kid seemed so lost. First her mother, then Tommy. She'd lost everyone who ever cared for her. Jimmy stood up and paced the small kitchen, running his hands through his graying hair. What did he know about raising a kid? He'd failed Tommy, hadn't he? Been absent most of his life. Showed up too late to make a difference. Now, here was this little girl. This piece of Tommy's life he never knew about, needing someone to take care of her. The coffee maker gurgled in the corner as Jimmy made his 3rd cup of the day. His mind wandered to practical matters, school enrollment, doctor appointments, proper meals, things he'd never had to think about before. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy leather jacket. "Mr. Harrison will see you now," the secretary said, her voice cutting through Jimmy's thoughts. He stood in the law office, feeling out of place among the polished wooden furniture and framed certificates. His boots left slight marks on the carpeted floor as he followed her to the lawyer's office. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, gestured to a chair. "Mr. Dawson, please sit down. You mentioned this was about seeking custody?" Jimmy lowered himself into the chair, aware of how his leather jacket creaked against the expensive furniture. "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "My son's daughter. Her mother passed away recently, and there's no one else." "I see." Mr. Harrison pulled out a legal pad. "And your relationship with the child?" Jimmy paused, the words sticking in his throat. I just found out about her, at my son's grave. But she's blood, and I made a promise to my boy that I'd do right by her. The lawyer's pen scratched against paper as he took notes. You understand this won't be simple? There will be background checks, home studies, questions about your past. Jimmy's jaw tightened. His past. The very thing he'd been running from for years now stood between him and doing right by Lucy. I know it won't be easy, he said quietly, but that little girl needs someone, and I'm all she's got left. Jimmy leaned against the doorframe of his spare bedroom, watching Lucy's small form rise and fall under the worn quilt. The moonlight filtering through the thin curtains cast a gentle glow on her peaceful face. His chest tightened as he noticed how she clutched Tommy's old teddy bear, the one he'd found buried in a box of childhood memories. The sight of her sleeping brought back a flood of memories. 25 years ago, he used to stand just like this, watching Tommy sleep in his crib. Back then, Jimmy had been younger, wilder, thinking the world owed him something. He remembered the night he left, Tommy crying in his mother's arms. Jimmy had convinced himself they were better off without him. I was wrong, son, he whispered into the darkness. So damn wrong. His mind drifted to Tommy's teenage years, when his son had tracked him down. Jimmy had been surprised by the tall, lanky kid standing outside his apartment, hands stuffed in his pockets, looking so much like himself at that age. Tommy had given him a second chance he didn't deserve. Jimmy's legs felt heavy as he walked to the kitchen. The coffee pot still had some left from earlier, and he poured himself a cup, not caring that it was cold. The bitter liquid matched his thoughts as he remembered the scattered visits, the missed birthdays, the broken promises. Some father I was, he muttered, setting the cup down harder than he meant to. Tommy had grown into a good man despite Jimmy's absence, not because of him. He'd been kind, responsible, everything Jimmy wasn't. And now here was Lucy, Tommy's daughter, sleeping in his spare room like a little angel who dropped into his life to offer him one last shot at redemption. Jimmy walked to the living room window, staring out at the dark street. His reflection in the glass showed a weathered face, lines etched deep from years of hard living. Behind him, a photo of Tommy sat on the mantel, one of the few times they'd been together, at a baseball game 5 years ago. Tommy's smile was genuine, while Jimmy's looked uncertain, like he didn't know how to be happy. The sound of small feet padding across the floor made him turn. Lucy stood in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. I had a bad dream, she said softly. Jimmy's heart melted at her vulnerable expression. Without thinking, he crossed the room and knelt before her. You want some warm milk? That used to help your daddy when he was little. Lucy nodded, and Jimmy led her to the kitchen. As he warmed the milk on the stove, he watched her sitting at his kitchen table, her legs dangling from the chair, Tommy's teddy bear still clutched tight. Your daddy, Jimmy began, his voice rough with emotion. He was a good man, better than me. He said you were brave, Lucy replied, surprising him. He showed me your picture once. Jimmy's hand trembled as he poured the warm milk into a mug. Setting it before Lucy, he sat down across from her. I wasn't brave, sweetheart. I ran away when things got tough. But I'm not running anymore. Lucy took a sip of milk, leaving a white mustache above her lip. Promise? Looking into her trusting eyes, Jimmy felt something shift inside him. The weight of his past mistakes seemed to crystallize into a single purpose. He reached across the table and gently wiped the milk from her upper lip with a napkin. I promise, Lucy, I'm going to be here for you, the way I should have been for your daddy. No more running, no more mistakes. Jimmy pulled his weathered truck into Pete's diner, the neon sign flickering against the darkening sky. He glanced at Lucy in the passenger seat, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore the new dress he'd bought her yesterday, pink with little white flowers. It was the first time he'd ever shopped for children's clothes, and the experience had left him both overwhelmed and oddly touched. "You hungry, kiddo?" he asked. His gruff voice softened around the edges. Lucy nodded, her eyes wide as she took in the chrome-trimmed building. "I've never been to a diner before," she admitted quietly. Jimmy's heart clenched. There was so much this little girl hadn't experienced, so many simple joys she'd missed out on. "Well, they make the best chocolate milkshakes in town. He caught himself. Tommy used to love them." Inside, they settled into a worn red vinyl booth. Lucy's feet dangled above the checkered floor, and she studied the laminated menu with serious concentration. The fluorescent lights cast a warm glow over her face, highlighting the dusting of freckles across her nose, just like Tommy's. "What can I get you folks?" The waitress, Betty, according to her name tag, smiled warmly at Lucy. "Chocolate milkshake," Lucy said softly, then looked at Jimmy for approval. "Make that 2, Jimmy said, "and a couple of cheeseburgers with fries." As they waited for their food, Lucy traced patterns on the condensation of her water glass. "Did you and Tommy come here a lot?" Jimmy shifted in his seat. "Sometimes. When he was about 12, he'd order the biggest sundae on the menu, called it the Mountain of Doom." The memory brought an unexpected smile to his face. Lucy giggled, and the sound hit Jimmy like a physical force. It was Tommy's laugh, the same musical quality, the same crinkle around the eyes. His chest tightened with a mixture of pain and something warmer, something that felt like hope. When their milkshakes arrived, Lucy's eyes grew round at the sight of the tall glass topped with whipped cream and a cherry. She took her first sip, and her face lit up with pure joy. "Good?" Jimmy asked, although her expression said it all. "The best," she beamed at him, a small chocolate mustache forming above her lip. Without thinking, Jimmy reached across the table with a napkin and gently wiped it away. The gesture felt so natural, so right, that it scared him a little. He'd never been good at this kind of thing. The gentle moments, the small acts of care. But with Lucy, it was different. Their burgers came, and they ate in comfortable silence. Jimmy watched as Lucy methodically arranged her fries from longest to shortest, just like Tommy used to do. These little similarities kept catching him off guard, making his heart stumble over itself. "Can we come back here again?" Lucy asked, as she pushed her empty plate away. "Anytime you want, kiddo." Jimmy meant it. He'd give her all the simple pleasures she'd missed out on, all the normal childhood experiences he'd failed to give Tommy. As they finished their milkshakes, Lucy's eyes grew heavy. It had been a long day, and the sugar crash was hitting her hard. She slid out of the booth and, without hesitation, slipped her small hand into Jimmy's large, calloused one. For the first time in years, Jimmy felt something like peace settle over him. This little girl, who'd appeared like a ghost at Tommy's grave, was slowly bringing life back into his world. She trusted him, despite his rough exterior and darker past. Maybe, just maybe, he could be the person she needed him to be. The phone's harsh ring cut through the peaceful morning silence. Jimmy glanced at Lucy, who sat at the kitchen table coloring with the new crayons he'd bought her. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated on staying within the lines. "Hello?" Jimmy's voice was low and guarded. He never gave out his number, and few people knew how to reach him. "Jimmy." The voice on the other end was familiar, but deliberately disguised. "There's something you need to know. Someone's asking questions about the girl." Jimmy's grip tightened on the receiver, and on the, He turned away from Lucy, lowering his voice further. Who? Remember Snake? He's back in town. Word is he's been digging into Tommy's past, asking about any kids he might have had. Jimmy's blood ran cold. Snake was bad news, one of the most ruthless members from his old Hell's Angels days. The man had no conscience, no limits. Thanks for the heads up, Jimmy muttered, hanging up. He watched Lucy for a moment, her innocence untouched by the darkness now creeping toward their door. The warning proved timely. That afternoon, while Lucy napped upstairs, a black motorcycle rumbled into Jimmy's driveway. Snake hadn't changed much, still wearing that leather vest covered in patches, his gray hair slicked back, eyes cold as winter. Well, well, the mighty Reaper playing house, Snake sneered, stepping onto the porch. Never thought I'd see the day. Jimmy blocked the doorway, his stance rigid. What do you want? That little girl you're harboring, Tommy's kid. Snake's thin lips curved into an ugly smile. Did you know your boy was sitting on quite a nest egg before he died? Insurance policies, offshore accounts, smart kid, and now it all belongs to his only heir. Leave her out of this, Jimmy growled. Snake's expression hardened. That's not how this works. That money belongs to the club. Tommy owed us, and now his kid's gonna make things right. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Give her up willingly, and maybe you get to walk away from this. Fight me on this and... He let the threat hang in the air. You're not touching her. Jimmy's voice was deadly calm, but inside his mind raced. He hadn't known about any money, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping Lucy safe. Snake's laugh was harsh. You've gone soft, old man. What happened to the Reaper who wouldn't think twice about breaking someone for looking at him wrong? He stepped back, mounting his bike. I'll be seeing you real soon. And that little girl? She's coming with me, one way or another. After Snake roared away, Jimmy closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. Upstairs he could hear Lucy stirring from her nap. The sound of her small feet padding across the floor made his resolve strengthen. He moved quickly, pulling out his old burner phone from a hidden compartment in his desk. He had contacts, people who owed him favors from his past life. People who could help him protect Lucy. As he dialed the first number, Jimmy caught his reflection in the window. The hardened biker was still there in his eyes, but now that strength had a purpose beyond violence. He would need every skill, every connection from his past to keep Lucy safe. Uncle Jimmy? Lucy's sleepy voice came from the stairs. Can we have cookies? Sure thing, sweetheart, he called back, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Be right there. He finished making his call, already forming plans. Snake was coming, and Jimmy needed to be ready. The question was, how do you protect an innocent child from the demons of your past? Jimmy stood in the dimly lit garage of his small house, his weathered hands gripping the workbench as he faced the man he'd hoped never to see again. The enemy's expensive leather jacket and perfectly styled gray hair couldn't hide the coldness in his eyes. Been a long time, Reaper, the man said, using Jimmy's old road name. His voice was smooth as silk, but carried poison underneath. Didn't expect to find you playing house with a little girl? Jimmy's jaw tightened. What do you want, Marcus? He kept his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Marcus walked around the garage, running his finger along Jimmy's tools. Tommy was always clever with money, wasn't he? Good at hiding things, too. He paused, picking up a wrench and examining it. Just like his old man. Leave Tommy out of this, Jimmy growled. The mention of his son's name from Marcus's lips made his blood boil. Can't do that, Jimmy. Marcus set the wrench down with a sharp clang. See, that little girl in there? She's worth more than this whole setup you've got going. Tommy left something behind, something big, And she's the key to finding it. Jimmy moved slightly, positioning himself between Marcus and the door leading to the house where Lucy slept. She's just a kid. A kid who's going to inherit quite a fortune once certain papers come to light. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Tommy made some interesting investments before he died. Smart ones. The kind that make people very, very rich. The garage felt smaller suddenly, the air thick with tension. Jimmy could hear the distant sound of crickets through the open door. The normal nighttime sounds a stark contrast to the dangerous conversation. Here's how this goes, Marcus continued, taking a step closer. You help me find what Tommy hid, or I'll take the girl. Legal channels, of course. His smile widened. I have friends in high places now, Jimmy. One phone call about an ex-Hell's Angel with a criminal record housing a little girl without proper custody papers. He let the threat hang in the air. Jimmy's fists clenched at his sides. You won't touch her. Don't be stupid, Reaper. You're not the only one who knew Tommy's mother. I've got just as much claim to look after the girl as you do. More, even, given your colorful past. The implications hit Jimmy like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't just threatening to take Lucy. He was threatening to destroy any chance Jimmy had of keeping her safe. I'll give you 3 days, Marcus said, walking toward the garage door. After that, well, he shrugged. Let's just say it would be better for everyone if you cooperated. Jimmy watched him go, his mind racing. The rumble of Marcus's car faded into the night, but the threat remained, heavy in the air. He looked toward the house, thinking of Lucy sleeping peacefully inside, unaware of the danger circling around her. He needed a plan. Marcus wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, and Jimmy couldn't risk losing Lucy. Not now, not after everything. He'd made a promise, to Tommy, to Lucy, to himself, and he intended to keep it. Moving quickly, Jimmy went to his old toolbox and pulled out a worn notebook. If Marcus wanted to play games, Jimmy would need to be ready. He began writing down names, dates, places, anything that might help him protect Lucy from the storm that was coming. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Jimmy worked, marking the beginning of a countdown he couldn't afford to lose. Jimmy watched Lucy from the kitchen as she sat at the coffee table, her small hands busy with colored pencils. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of his small house, casting a warm glow on her blonde hair. It had been 2 weeks since he'd found her at Tommy's grave, and each day brought subtle changes to their routine. He poured milk into a glass and grabbed a plate of chocolate chip cookies he'd bought at the grocery store. Lucy's face lit up when he set them down beside her drawing. "Thank you," she said softly, reaching for a cookie with her left hand, while continuing to color with her right. Jimmy settled into his worn leather armchair, noticing how Lucy had slowly begun to fill the empty spaces in his home. Her backpack hung by the door, a purple hair tie lay on the bathroom counter, and small shoes lined up neatly next to his heavy boots. "What are you drawing there, kiddo?" he asked, leaning forward to get a better look. Lucy held up her artwork, pride shining in her eyes. "It's you and Daddy Tommy," she explained, pointing to 2 stick figures. One was tall with a beard and wearing what looked like a leather jacket. The other figure had a big smile and stood next to a motorcycle. Jimmy's throat tightened as he studied the drawing. "That's real nice, Lucy. You got my beard just right." He touched his face, managing a small smile. "Can I put it on the fridge?" she asked, already standing up. "Course you can." Jimmy watched as she carefully attached the drawing with a magnet. She stepped back to admire her work, and something in her innocent gesture made his chest ache. "Tommy used to draw pictures too," Jimmy said, surprising himself. He rarely spoke about Tommy, but with Lucy, the memories didn't hurt quite as much. "He loved drawing motorcycles when he was your age." Lucy turned to him, her eyes wide with interest. "Really? Did you keep any of them?" Jimmy nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I got some in a box somewhere. He stood up and walked to the hall closet, pulling down a dusty cardboard box labeled Tommy's stuff. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor beside him as he pulled out old drawings, report cards, and photographs. She touched each item gently, as if they were precious treasures. "Look at this one," Jimmy said, holding up a crayon drawing of a red motorcycle. "Tommy drew this when he was 7. Said he was going to ride just like his old man someday." The words caught in his throat. Lucy leaned against his arm, her small hand finding his. "Don't be sad," she whispered. "Daddy Tommy's watching us from heaven. That's what Mommy used to say." Jimmy looked down at her. This little girl who'd somehow worked her way into his heart without him even noticing. She trusted him completely, saw good in him that he'd forgotten existed. Maybe this was his chance to make things right, to be the father he should have been to Tommy. "You know what?" Jimmy said, standing up. "How about we get you some new drawing supplies? Proper ones with a sketchbook and everything?" Lucy's face brightened. "Really? Can we get colored markers too?" "Whatever you want, kiddo." He helped her put on her jacket, watching as she carefully straightened the collar, just like he'd shown her. As they headed for the door, Jimmy glanced back at her drawing on the fridge, the stick figure family she'd created, where he stood tall and strong beside Tommy. In Lucy's eyes, he wasn't Reaper the outlaw biker anymore. He was just Jimmy, her guardian, her protector. Jimmy's weathered pickup truck rumbled down a familiar street in the old neighborhood. Houses with peeling paint and rusty chain-link fences lined both sides. He pulled up to a small auto repair shop with a faded sign that read, "Al's Auto." The place hadn't changed much in 20 years. Inside the dimly lit garage, old Allie was bent over the engine of a beat-up Chevy. The smell of motor oil and grease filled the air. When the door creaked open, Allie straightened up, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Allie said, his voice gruff but friendly. "Heard you've got yourself a little girl now." Jimmy nodded, hands in his jacket pockets. "Tommy's daughter. There's more to it than that, though. Need to know what he was up to before." He couldn't finish the sentence. Allie's expression softened. He tossed the rag onto a workbench and gestured toward a small office in the back. "Come on, coffee's terrible, but it's hot." In the cramped office, Jimmy sat in a metal folding chair, while Allie poured 2 cups of coffee from an ancient pot. The walls were covered with old calendars and yellowed service receipts. "Tommy used to stop by here," Allie said, settling into his desk chair. "Sometimes twice a week. Always had questions about legal stuff. Thought it was strange at the time." Jimmy's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "Legal stuff?" "Yeah. He was working with some fancy lawyer downtown. Something about setting up accounts, trusts, that kind of thing." Allie leaned forward. "About 6 months before the accident, he seemed worried. Said he needed to make sure everything was in order for Lucy." "Did he say anything about money? An inheritance?" Jimmy asked. "Not directly." Allie reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn envelope. "But he left this with me. Said if anything happened to him, I should hang on to it until you came asking questions." Jimmy's hands shook slightly as he took the envelope. Inside was a business card for a law firm and a handwritten note from Tommy. "Dad, if you're reading this, something's happened. Lucy needs protection. Talk to Martinez and Associates. They know everything." "There's more," Allie said quietly. "Tommy mentioned something about his mother's family. Old money, I think. Said Lucy might be entitled to something big, but there were people who didn't want that getting out." Jimmy remembered the threatening man who'd been asking about Lucy. Things were starting to make sense. "Did he say who these people were?" Allie shook his head. He was careful about names. But he was scared, Jimmy. Not for himself, for Lucy. Jimmy folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Tommy was specific. Said to wait until you came asking. Said you'd only come when it really mattered. Allie's eyes met Jimmy's. Guess that time is now, huh? Jimmy stood up, his coffee untouched. Thanks, Allie. I owe you. Just take care of that little girl, Allie called after him as Jimmy headed for the door. Tommy would have wanted that. Back in his truck, Jimmy stared at the business card. The pieces were falling into place. Lucy's connection to old money, Tommy's secret legal work, and the threats they now faced. He knew what he had to do next. Find out what Martinez and associates knew about Tommy's plans for Lucy's future. He started the engine, his mind racing with questions. Whatever fortune Lucy was connected to, it was big enough to make dangerous men come looking. But Tommy had tried to protect her, and now it was Jimmy's turn to finish what his son had started. Jimmy pulled his motorcycle into the dimly lit parking lot of Pete's Bar and Grill, a rundown establishment on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered weakly in the growing darkness, casting intermittent red shadows across the cracked asphalt. His old ally, Mike "Old Man" Henderson, waited inside, one of the few people from his past Jimmy still trusted. The door creaked as Jimmy entered, and the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit him. A few patrons looked up briefly before returning to their drinks. Old Man sat in a corner booth, his weathered face partially hidden by the shadows. "Been a while, Reaper," Old Man said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. His voice was gravelly from years of smoking, and his leather vest showed the wear of decades on the road. Jimmy slid into the booth, keeping his voice low. "Need your help, Mike. It's about the girl." Old Man's eyes narrowed. "Tommy's kid? Word's getting around about her." "That's what worries me." Jimmy leaned forward, his hands clasped on the sticky table. "Someone's after her. Claims there's money involved. Big money. I need to know what Tommy was working on before he died." The old biker took a long drink from his beer, his expression unreadable. "Tommy was always careful with his business, kept things close to the chest. But you knew him, worked with him sometimes." Jimmy watched Old Man's face carefully. Something felt off about his old friend's demeanor. "Yeah, I did." Old Man shifted uncomfortably. He mentioned something about setting up a trust. Said it was important, but that's all I know. Jimmy noticed Old Man's fingers drumming nervously on the table, a tell he remembered from their poker games years ago. Then he saw it. A new burner phone peeking out from Old Man's vest pocket, different from his usual one. The pieces started falling into place. The enemy always seemed one step ahead, knowing their movements, their plans. Jimmy's jaw clenched as realization dawned. "How long have you been feeding him information?" Jimmy's voice was deadly quiet. Old Man's face twitched. "Don't know what you're talking about, Reaper." "The phone. The nervous tells. You were always a terrible liar, Mike." Jimmy's hands balled into fists under the table. "You've been working with him this whole time." The old biker's facade cracked. "It's not what you think. He made me an offer." "An offer?" Jimmy's voice rose slightly. "To betray Tommy's daughter?" "You don't understand the kind of pressure he put on me." Old Man's eyes darted toward the door. "My grandson's sick. The medical bills." Jimmy stood up slowly, his presence looming over the table. "You could have come to me. I would have helped you." "Would you?" Old Man sneered, suddenly defensive. "The great Jimmy Reaper Dawson, who abandoned his own kid?" The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow, but before he could respond, Old Man shoved the table hard into Jimmy's midsection. The move caught Jimmy off guard, sending him stumbling backward into a neighboring table. In the ensuing chaos of falling glasses and startled shouts, Old Man bolted for the door. Jimmy recovered quickly and gave chase, but by the time he reached the parking lot, Old Man's motorcycle was already roaring away into the night, leaving Jimmy standing alone with the bitter taste of betrayal in his mouth. Jimmy sat at his kitchen table, staring at the half-empty whiskey glass in front of him. The betrayal of his old friend cut deep, reopening wounds he thought had healed long ago. The dim light from the overhead lamp cast shadows across his weathered face, making the lines of worry more pronounced. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, running a calloused hand through his graying hair. "I can't protect her. I couldn't even protect Tommy." The weight of his failures pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy chain. The sound of small feet padding across the wooden floor made him look up. Lucy stood in the doorway of the kitchen, clutching her worn teddy bear. Her blue pajamas were wrinkled, and her blonde hair was messy from sleep. "Uncle Jimmy?" Her voice was soft, hesitant. "Are you sad?" Jimmy quickly wiped his face, trying to hide the evidence of his moment of weakness. "It's late, sweetheart. You should be in bed." Instead of leaving, Lucy walked over to him, her bare feet making little noise on the cold floor. She climbed onto the chair next to his, her teddy bear still held tight against her chest. "Daddy used to get sad too," she said, looking up at him with those innocent eyes that reminded him so much of Tommy. "He would sit just like you, all quiet and thinking." Jimmy's throat tightened. What did he do when he was sad? "He'd tell me stories about when he was little," Lucy smiled slightly, "and about his daddy who rode motorcycles." She reached out and put her small hand on Jimmy's arm. "He said his daddy was a hero, even if he didn't know it yet." Jimmy felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. "Tommy said that? About me?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "He promised he'd always take care of me, just like you promised to take care of him." She hugged her teddy bear closer. "And now you're taking care of me, just like Daddy wanted." The simple truth in her words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. He remembered the last conversation he'd had with Tommy, the promise he'd made to be there if Tommy ever needed him. He hadn't known then about Lucy, but somehow Tommy had known his father would step up when the time came. "You're right, sweetheart," Jimmy said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out and gently smoothed Lucy's tangled hair. "Your daddy was the best man I knew, and he loved you very much." "I know," Lucy said. She leaned against Jimmy's arm, her warmth seeping through his shirt. "And now you love me too, right?" Jimmy looked down at this little girl who had somehow worked her way into his heart, just as Tommy had done years ago. The thought of giving up, of letting her down like he'd let down so many others, suddenly seemed impossible. "Yeah, Lucy," he whispered, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "I love you too, and I'm not going anywhere." Lucy smiled, snuggling closer. "Good, because Daddy said we're family, and family stays together." In that moment, Jimmy knew he couldn't back down, couldn't give up, no matter how dangerous things got. This wasn't just about honoring Tommy's memory anymore. It was about protecting this precious child who trusted him completely. The fear and doubt that had been consuming him earlier began to fade, replaced by a fierce determination. Lucy yawned, her eyes starting to droop. Jimmy stood, carefully lifting her in his arms. "Come on, princess. Time for bed." As he carried her back to her room, he felt stronger than he had in years. He might have failed before, but he wouldn't fail now. Not when Lucy needed him most. Jimmy's old pickup truck rumbled down the empty back roads, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Lucy slept in the passenger seat, her small head resting against the window, clutching the teddy bear Jimmy had bought her at their last gas station stop. Every few minutes, he'd glance in the rearview mirror, watching for any signs they were being followed. "We'll be okay, kiddo," he whispered, more to himself than to Lucy. The weight of his gun pressed against his lower back, a reminder of the life he'd tried to leave behind. He hadn't wanted to bring it, but with the enemy closing in, he couldn't take chances. They'd been on the move for 3 days now, staying in cheap motels and eating at quiet diners where nobody asked questions. Jimmy kept them moving, never staying in one place too long. But he could feel the net tightening around them. Lucy stirred, rubbing her eyes. "Are we there yet, Jimmy?" "Not yet, sweetheart. Try to get some more sleep." He reached over and tucked her blanket tighter around her shoulders. A pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, getting closer. Jimmy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The vehicle behind them was gaining speed, and its high beams flashed twice. "Lucy, honey, I need you to stay down, okay?" Jimmy's voice was calm but firm. "Remember what we practiced?" Lucy nodded bravely and slid down in her seat, pulling the blanket over herself. Jimmy's heart ached, seeing her so scared, but knowing exactly what to do. No 6-year-old should have to practice hiding. The car behind them was definitely following now. Jimmy recognized the aggressive way it drove. These weren't ordinary travelers. He took a sharp turn onto a dirt road, hoping to lose them, but the headlights stayed with them. "Hold on tight," Jimmy warned as he pressed the gas pedal harder. The truck bounced and rattled over the uneven ground. Lucy whimpered but stayed hidden. The dirt road led to an abandoned lumber mill. Jimmy's truck skidded to a stop in the gravel lot, clouds of dust billowing around them. He quickly killed the lights and engine. "Lucy, listen to me carefully." He turned to face her, his voice urgent but gentle. "We're going to play hide and seek, okay? I need you to be very quiet and stay hidden until I come get you." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear but trusting. Jimmy helped her out of the truck and guided her to an old office building. Inside, he found a sturdy storage closet. "Stay here, no matter what you hear. Promise me?" "I promise," Lucy whispered, squeezing his hand. The sound of approaching vehicles made Jimmy's jaw clench. He closed the closet door and moved quickly back outside. 2 black SUVs pulled into the lot, their headlights sweeping across the mill's weathered buildings. Jimmy stood his ground as 4 men emerged from the vehicles. He recognized his old enemy among them, the man's face twisted in a cruel smile. "End of the road, Reaper," the enemy called out. "Just tell us where the girl is, and maybe we can work something out." Jimmy's hand moved closer to his concealed weapon. "You're not getting anywhere near her." The enemy's smile faded. "Always trying to play the hero, aren't you? Too bad you couldn't save Tommy." Those words hit Jimmy like a physical blow, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he thought of Lucy hiding nearby. Counting on him, he thought of Tommy's letter and his promise to protect her. "Last chance," the enemy said, his men spreading out around Jimmy. "Where is she?" Jimmy sat in a dimly lit corner booth of Mel's diner, his weathered hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Lucy was asleep in the booth beside him, her small head resting on his leather jacket. The past few days of running had taken their toll on both of them. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he watched the door, jumping at every bell chime when customers entered. The fluorescent lights flickered, and Jimmy's heart nearly stopped when a hulking figure appeared in the entrance. Snake Eyes Martinez, his old rival from the hellsangels, stood there scanning the diner. Jimmy's hand instinctively moved toward the inside of his jacket, but he froze when Snake Eyes raised both palms in a peaceful gesture. "Mind if I sit?" Snake Eyes asked quietly, sliding into the booth across from Jimmy. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were still sharp and alert. Jimmy's jaw clenched. "Didn't expect to see you here, Snake. Last I heard, you were running your own crew down in Nevada." "Things change," Snake Eyes replied, his voice gravelly but soft enough not to wake Lucy. He glanced at the sleeping girl, then back at Jimmy. "Heard about your situation. Word travels fast in our old circles." "If you're here to cause trouble," Jimmy started, but Snake Eyes cut him off with a slight shake of his head. "I'm here to help, believe it or not." He pulled out an old photograph and slid it across the table. "Remember this?" Jimmy picked up the photo. It showed younger versions of themselves, standing with their bikes before their falling out. "That was a lifetime ago." "Yeah, well, seems we got more in common than old memories now." Snake Eyes leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "That enemy of yours, he did me dirty too. Took everything I had built up in Nevada. My crew, my territory, even my own brother turned against me because of his lies." Jimmy studied his old rival's face, looking for any sign of deception. All he saw was raw pain and anger, emotions he knew all too well. "Why should I trust you?" "Because right now, I'm probably the only one who hates him as much as you do." Snake Eyes gestured to Lucy. "And because I've got a daughter too. Wouldn't want anyone using her as a pawn in their game." The mention of his daughter seemed to cost Snake Eyes something, his tough exterior cracking just slightly. Jimmy had never known about that part of his life. "What are you proposing?" Jimmy asked, still cautious but feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "I've got safe houses, contacts he doesn't know about, people who owe me favors." Snake Eyes pulled out a burner phone and placed it on the table. "More importantly, I know how he thinks, how he operates. Together we might have a chance to take him down." Jimmy looked at Lucy, then back at Snake Eyes. The man he'd once considered an enemy was offering him something he desperately needed, a fighting chance. "Okay," Jimmy said finally, reaching for the phone. "But if this is some kind of trick—" "It's not," Snake Eyes interrupted, his expression deadly serious. "We've both lost too much to that bastard. It's time we did something about it." They spent the next hour planning, speaking in hushed tones while Lucy slept peacefully beside them. With each detail Snake Eyes shared, Jimmy felt his spirits lifting. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance after all. As they wrapped up their meeting, Snake Eyes stood to leave. "Get some rest, old friend. Tomorrow we start fighting back." Jimmy watched him go, feeling something he hadn't felt in days: hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jimmy stood in the dimly lit warehouse, his weathered face set with determination. The musty air hung heavy with tension as he faced his enemy, a man he'd once called brother in the hellsangels. Flickering fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor, making the scene feel like something out of his darker past. "It ends tonight," Jimmy said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "You're going to leave Lucy alone." The enemy's laugh echoed through the empty space. "You still don't get it, do you, Reaper?" He circled slowly, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the floor. This was never about the money. Tommy knew what he was protecting. Jimmy's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" "Your boy," the enemy said, pulling out a cigarette and lighting it with deliberate slowness, "was smarter than you ever gave him credit for. He infiltrated our network, worked his way deep inside while pretending to be just another lawyer." The words hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His son, his Tommy, had been living a double life? "You're lying." "Am I?" The enemy reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Tommy kept records, detailed ones, about the artifact. Jimmy's confusion must have shown on his face because the enemy's smile widened. The inheritance isn't money, Jimmy. It's something far more valuable. Something that could bring down an entire criminal empire. The fluorescent light above them buzzed and flickered as Jimmy processed this information. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. What artifact? A ledger. The original one. Names, dates, transactions, everything from the past 30 years. Every dirty deal, every crooked cop, every murdered witness. The enemy took a long drag from his cigarette. Tommy found it, and like an idiot, instead of using it for leverage, he wanted to turn it over to the feds. Jimmy's mind raced back to the weeks before Tommy's death. The late-night phone calls, the nervous glances, the way he'd insisted on Jimmy promising to protect Lucy if anything happened to him. The motorcycle accident, Jimmy said, his voice barely a whisper. It wasn't an accident. Smart boy, finally catching up. The enemy flicked ash onto the floor. Tommy hid the ledger before we could get to it. We thought he might have told Lucy where it was. Kids remember the strangest things. But now I'm thinking maybe he left clues with you. The truth crashed over Jimmy like a wave. His son hadn't just been a lawyer trying to do the right thing. He'd been a man willing to risk everything to expose corruption. And Lucy wasn't just his granddaughter. She was the key to finishing what Tommy had started. She's just a little girl, Jimmy growled, taking a step forward. She doesn't know anything about this. Maybe not consciously, the enemy said, but Tommy was clever. He might have hidden the information in plain sight. A bedtime story, a special place they visited, a game they played. He stubbed out his cigarette under his heel. That's why we need her, Jimmy, and that's why you're not leaving here with her. Jimmy's entire body tensed, ready for action. Everything made sense now. The persistent threats, the obsession with Lucy, the desperation to control her. This wasn't about money or revenge anymore. This was about power, about secrets that could destroy an empire built on blood and corruption. And his son, his brave, foolish, righteous son, had died trying to expose it all. The weight of this revelation settled over Jimmy like armor. Protecting Lucy wasn't just about keeping a promise anymore. It was about preserving Tommy's legacy, about finishing what his son had started, and he would die before he let these criminals use an innocent child for their twisted purposes. Jimmy sat in the dim light of Old Allie's garage, his weathered hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Lucy slept peacefully on a worn couch nearby, clutching her favorite teddy bear. The sound of motorcycles rumbling in the distance kept them all on edge. We need to move fast, Old Allie said, spreading out a makeshift map on the oil-stained workbench. The enemy's got eyes everywhere, and they're closing in. Jimmy nodded, studying the crude drawing. Their main operation is here. He pointed to a circled warehouse. Based on what we know, that's where they're keeping the artifact Tommy was protecting. Old Allie scratched his gray beard. Getting in won't be easy. They've got at least 20 men, all armed. But they don't know about the tunnel system, Jimmy said, tracing a line with his finger. Tommy showed me these old bootlegger passages years ago. They run right under the warehouse. The plan took shape as they talked. Old Allie would create a diversion at the front gate, drawing attention away from the south entrance. Meanwhile, Jimmy and 3 trusted riders would slip in through the tunnels. What about Lucy? Jimmy asked, glancing at the sleeping child. My sister's place, Old Allie suggested. It's off the grid and no one knows about it. She'll be safe there. Jimmy walked over to Lucy and gently brushed her hair from her face. The thought of leaving her, even temporarily, made his heart ache. But he knew it was necessary. When morning came, they put the plan in motion. Jimmy hugged Lucy tightly before Old Allie's sister drove her away. I'll come back for you, sweetheart. I promise. The tunnels were exactly as Tommy had described them. Narrow, damp and perfect for their needs. Jimmy led his small team through the darkness, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Above them, they could hear the rumble of vehicles and voices. Right on schedule, Old Alley's diversion began. The sound of explosions and shouting filled the air. Jimmy counted to 30, then gave the signal. They emerged from a hidden entrance behind stacked crates, catching 2 guards completely off guard. "Remember," Jimmy whispered to his team, "we're here for the artifact. Nothing else." They moved swiftly through the warehouse, neutralizing resistance with practiced efficiency. Jimmy's old skills came back naturally, the silent takedowns, the quick thinking, the absolute focus. But this time, it wasn't for personal gain or revenge. It was for Lucy. They found the office where the artifact was supposed to be kept, but something felt wrong. The safe was already open, empty. Jimmy's instincts screamed danger just as gunfire erupted from above. "It's a trap!" someone yelled. The team scattered for cover as bullets rained down. Jimmy dove behind a metal desk, his mind racing. The enemy had anticipated their move, used their own plan against them. Through his earpiece, he heard Old Alley's urgent voice. "Jimmy, they're moving. A black SUV just left the compound heading east." Jimmy's blood ran cold. East, toward where Lucy was hiding. The enemy had played them, letting them focus on the warehouse while their real target was elsewhere. "Fall back," Jimmy ordered his team. "Get to the bikes." They retreated through the tunnels, the sound of pursuit close behind. Jimmy's heart pounded not from the exertion, but from fear. Their carefully laid plan had backfired, and now Lucy was in even greater danger. Old Alley met them at the rendezvous point, his face grim. "They're 20 minutes ahead of us, Jimmy. We've got to move now." Jimmy straddled his motorcycle, the engine roaring to life. Lucy's scared face flashed in his mind, and he knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jimmy paced the worn floorboards of the old cabin, his weathered boots creaking with each step. Through the window, he watched Lucy sleeping peacefully on the threadbare couch, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty glass, reminding him that time was running out. His old rival turned ally, Mike, sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his gun. "They're coming, Jimmy. You know that, right?" Jimmy nodded, running a hand through his graying hair. "Yeah, I know." He walked over to Lucy and gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "We've got maybe an hour, tops," Mike said, his voice low and grave. "They tracked us here. It's only a matter of time." Jimmy's jaw clenched as he looked at the innocent child before him. In just a few short weeks, she had become his whole world. She reminded him so much of Tommy. The same gentle spirit, the same trusting eyes. He couldn't let anything happen to her. "There's only one way out of this," Jimmy said, his voice rough with emotion. "They want me, always have. Lucy's just their leverage." Mike looked up sharply. "What are you thinking?" Jimmy pulled out an old map from his jacket pocket, spreading it across the table. His finger traced a path through the woods. "There's an old church about 3 miles north. Father Matthews. He helped me years ago when I was trying to get clean. He'll keep Lucy safe." "Jimmy," Mike started, but Jimmy cut him off. "I need you to get her there," Jimmy said firmly, "while I give them what they want." Mike stood up, shaking his head. "That's suicide, man. They'll kill you." "Maybe," Jimmy admitted, "but Lucy will be safe. That's all that matters now." He walked back to the couch, kneeling beside it. Looking at Lucy's peaceful face, he felt his heart break a little. "I promised Tommy I'd protect her. This is how I make good on that promise." The sound of approaching vehicles made them both tense. Jimmy quickly shook Lucy awake. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, forcing a smile. "You need to go with Uncle Mike now, okay?" Lucy's eyes flickered open, confusion clouding her face. "Where are you going?" "I've got to take care of something," Jimmy said, his voice catching. "But I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded, though fear crept into her expression. She threw her arms around his neck, holding tight. "Please don't leave me," she whispered. Jimmy hugged her back, memorizing the feeling of her small arms around his neck, the sweet smell of her hair. "I love you, kiddo," he managed to say. "Now go with Mike, quick and quiet, just like we practiced." As Mike led Lucy toward the back door, Jimmy checked his gun one last time. The sounds of vehicles were getting closer, gravel crunching under tires. He watched through the window as Mike and Lucy disappeared into the dense forest, heading north. Jimmy took a deep breath and stepped onto the front porch. He could see 3 black SUVs approaching through the trees. His enemy would be in one of them, coming to claim what he thought was his right. But Jimmy had made sure Lucy's inheritance, the artifact that had caused all this trouble, was safely hidden where no one would ever find it. The vehicles stopped, and men began pouring out, weapons drawn. Jimmy raised his hands slowly, showing himself. As they surrounded him, he caught sight of his enemy's familiar face emerging from the center vehicle, wearing a cold smile. Jimmy didn't resist as they grabbed him roughly. He knew that every second they spent dealing with him was another second Lucy had to get away. And that was all that mattered now. Lucy huddled in the back seat of an old pickup truck, her small hands clutching the worn teddy bear Jimmy had given her just days ago. The truck bounced along the dark country roads, driven by Mike, one of Jimmy's trusted friends from his reformed biker days. Rain pelted against the windows, matching the tears that streamed down her face. "We gotta keep moving, kid," Mike said, his gruff voice softening as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Jimmy wanted you safe." Lucy pressed her face against the cold window, watching the shadows of trees blur past. Her heart ached, thinking about Jimmy facing those bad men alone. She remembered the look in his eyes when he'd pushed her toward Mike, telling her to run. It was the same look her daddy Tommy had in the photo Jimmy kept by his bedside. "But Jimmy needs help," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rumbling engine. The truck pulled into an old gas station, its neon signs flickering weakly in the darkness. Mike turned around in his seat, his weathered face creased with concern. "Listen, Lucy. Jimmy's tough. He's been through worse." But Lucy knew better. She'd seen the fear in Jimmy's eyes. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. Just like when they'd first met at the cemetery, she could see past his tough exterior to the gentle heart beneath. While Mike went inside to pay for gas, Lucy sat perfectly still, remembering all the moments she'd shared with Jimmy over the past weeks. The way he'd carefully braided her hair, though his big hands were clumsy at first. How he'd read her bedtime stories, stumbling over words but never giving up. The proud smile on his face when she'd drawn their family picture. Something stirred in her chest. The same determination she'd seen in Jimmy's eyes whenever he promised to protect her. She couldn't leave him behind. She wouldn't. When Mike returned with coffee and started the truck, Lucy pretended to fall asleep. She knew the old church where they'd caught Jimmy was only a few miles back. She'd seen it through the trees, its broken steeple reaching toward the sky like a crooked finger. The truck stopped at a small motel, its vacancy sign buzzing in the rain. Mike carried her inside, thinking she was asleep. Lucy kept her breathing steady and even, just like Jimmy had taught her when they played hide and seek. "Poor kid's exhausted," Mike muttered to Sarah, another of Jimmy's friends who'd been waiting for them. "I'll take first watch." They laid her on the bed, and Lucy waited, listening to their hushed voices as they discussed plans in the other room. Her heart pounded as she slowly slipped from the bed, her sock-covered feet silent on the carpet. The motel room door squeaked slightly as she eased it open, but the sound of rain covered her escape. Lucy darted into the darkness, her small figure disappearing into the shadows. She knew she should be scared, but all she could think about was Jimmy, and how he never left her behind, not even once. Through the rain and darkness, Lucy followed the road back, remembering landmarks from their drive: the crooked mailbox, the big oak tree split by lightning, the rusty tractor in an abandoned field. Each step took her closer to Jimmy, her determination growing stronger even as her clothes grew heavy with rain. "I'm coming, Jimmy," she whispered into the night, her voice steady despite her chattering teeth. "You didn't leave me, and I won't leave you." Jimmy stood in the abandoned warehouse, his weathered hands clenched into fists as he faced his old enemy. The moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Lucy stood behind him, her small fingers gripping the back of his leather jacket. "It ends tonight," Jimmy's voice echoed through the empty space. "You're not getting anywhere near her again." The enemy's cold laugh bounced off the walls. "Always the hero now, aren't you, Reaper? What happened to the man who didn't care about anyone but himself?" "He died the day he met this little girl," Jimmy replied, his voice steady and sure. He could feel Lucy's grip tighten on his jacket. The enemy moved forward, flanked by 2 of his men. "The artifact belongs to us, Jimmy. Hand it over, and maybe we'll let you both walk away." Lucy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn key. The key to Tommy's old storage unit, the one that contained evidence of the criminal network's activities. "Daddy Tommy gave this to me," she said, her voice small but brave. "He said it would keep me safe." Jimmy's heart swelled with pride at her courage. He remembered Tommy's words from the letter. "The truth will set us free." Now he understood what his son had been protecting all along. The enemy lunged forward, but Jimmy was ready. Years of street fighting came back in an instant. He blocked the first punch and countered with a powerful right hook that sent his opponent staggering backward. The 2 henchmen rushed in, but Jimmy's newfound ally, his former rival, burst through the side door with reinforcements. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Lucy ducked behind a stack of crates, clutching the key. Jimmy fought with everything he had, every punch fueled by his promise to protect her. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, their backup plan in motion. "It's over," Jimmy shouted as police cars surrounded the building. "Tommy kept records of everything, every crime, every deal. That's what's in that storage unit. That's what you've been looking for." The enemy's face contorted with rage as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. He reached for his weapon, but Jimmy was faster. With a decisive strike, he knocked the gun away and pinned his old adversary to the ground. "Lucy," Jimmy called out, "you can come out now, it's safe." She emerged from her hiding spot, tears streaming down her face but determination in her eyes. She walked straight to Jimmy and wrapped her arms around his waist. The police stormed in, quickly taking control of the situation. As the enemy was led away in handcuffs, he spat out, "You've gone soft, Reaper." Jimmy looked down at Lucy, who was still holding on to him tightly. "No," he said, "I've finally gotten strong." The adrenaline drained from his body, and his legs began to shake. The weight of everything, the fights, the fear, the responsibility, came crashing down. Jimmy's knees buckled, and he sank to the floor, pulling Lucy close. "Are you okay?" she asked, her small hands touching his face with concern. "Yeah, sweetheart," he managed, his breath coming in heavy gasps. "I'm just tired. Real tired." He leaned back against a wall, holding Lucy safe in his arms as the police secured the scene. His body ached, but his heart was lighter than it had been in years. Tommy's legacy was safe. Lucy was safe. And somehow, against all odds, he'd found his redemption. As his eyes grew heavy with exhaustion, he heard Lucy whisper, "I love you, Jimmy." He pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, kid. I love you too." The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Jimmy's small house, casting warm strips of light across the kitchen table. Lucy sat there, her legs swinging freely as she ate her breakfast cereal. Jimmy watched her from the counter, a cup of coffee warming his hands. The bruises on his face were healing, fading reminders of the fight that had changed everything. "Can I have more milk?" Lucy asked, holding up her bowl with both hands. Jimmy nodded, grabbing the carton from the fridge. "Sure thing, kiddo." His voice was gentle, different from the gruff tone he'd carried for so many years. As he poured the milk, he noticed Lucy's school bag by the door, packed and ready for her first day at her new school. The past few weeks had been about creating routines, building stability. Jimmy had painted Lucy's room soft yellow, her favorite color. They'd picked out furniture together at the local store, and Lucy had chosen a butterfly bedspread that now brightened up the once sparse house. "You nervous about school?" Jimmy asked, sitting down across from her. Lucy shrugged, stirring her cereal. "A little. Will you pick me up after?" "Every single day," Jimmy promised. He reached across the table and squeezed her small hand. "That's what dads do." The word still felt new on his tongue. But right. The custody papers were official now, signed and filed. Lucy was legally his daughter, and every day he worked to deserve that title. After breakfast, Jimmy helped Lucy with her jacket. She'd grown more talkative lately, filling the house with stories and questions. The silence that had haunted these walls since Tommy's death had been replaced with life. "Can we visit Tommy today?" Lucy asked as she slipped on her shoes. "After school?" Jimmy paused, his heart squeezing. "Yeah, we can do that." The school day passed quickly, and true to his word, Jimmy was there when the bell rang. Lucy ran to him, her backpack bouncing, a drawing clutched in her hand. "I made this in art class," she said, holding it up proudly. It was a picture of 3 people, Lucy, Jimmy, and Tommy, standing under a bright sun. Jimmy's throat tightened as he studied it. They drove to the cemetery in comfortable silence. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grounds as they walked the familiar path to Tommy's grave. Jimmy carried a small bunch of flowers they'd bought on the way. At the headstone, Lucy knelt down and arranged the flowers carefully. Jimmy stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The guilt and pain that had once consumed him here had transformed into something else. Not gone, but different. Softer. "Hey, Tommy," Lucy whispered, touching the stone. "I started school today. Jimmy's taking good care of me, just like you said he would." Jimmy squeezed her shoulder gently. His son's grave had once been a place of darkness for him, a reminder of his failures. Now, standing here with Lucy, it felt more like a bridge between past and present, between loss and love. "I wish you could see her," Jimmy said quietly to the stone. "She's so much like you, son. Smart, brave." He looked down at Lucy, who was tracing Tommy's name with her finger. "I promise I'll do right by her. I won't fail this time." Lucy stood up and slipped her small hand into Jimmy's large one. Together they stood there, a family forged through loss but bound by love, as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. The gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and nearby flowers, and for the first time in years, Jimmy felt at peace. Jimmy sat on the worn leather armchair in his living room, watching Lucy as she colored at the coffee table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The past few months felt like a lifetime ago. The danger, the fear, the constant running. Now, in this peaceful moment, he could finally breathe. Lucy hummed softly as she drew, her small hands carefully moving across the paper. The sound reminded him of Tommy, who used to whistle while working on his motorcycle. The memory, for once, didn't bring the usual sharp stab of pain. "Lucy," Jimmy said, his voice gentle. "Can we talk for a minute?" She looked up, her big eyes curious. "Sure, Jimmy." She set down her crayons and climbed onto the arm of his chair, something she'd started doing recently when they had their heart-to-hearts. Jimmy cleared his throat, fighting the tightness there. "You know, before I met you, I made a lot of mistakes in my life." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wasn't always a good person. I wasn't there for Tommy when he was growing up, and that's something I regretted every day." Lucy listened intently, her small hand finding his rough one. The simple gesture gave him strength to continue. "I was scared back then," he admitted. "Scared of being a father, scared of responsibility. So I ran away. I joined a motorcycle gang and tried to forget about everything else." His voice grew hoarse. "But you can't outrun your mistakes. They catch up to you eventually. Were you scared when you found me?" Lucy asked softly. Jimmy nodded, a sad smile crossing his weathered face. "Terrified. But this time I knew I couldn't run away. Tommy would have wanted me to take care of you and—" He squeezed her hand gently. "And I wanted to be there for you, too." "I was scared, too," Lucy confessed. "After Mom died, I thought I'd be alone forever." Jimmy felt tears pricking at his eyes. "You'll never be alone again, sweetheart. I promise you that." Lucy wrapped her arms around his neck, and Jimmy held her close, feeling the weight of his guilt beginning to lift. For years, he'd carried the burden of his past like a heavy chain, but now, in this moment with Lucy, he felt those chains starting to break. "You know what?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Tommy would be proud of you. You're brave and strong, just like he was." Lucy pulled back, wiping a tear from his cheek with her small hand. "He'd be proud of you too, Jimmy. You saved me." Jimmy shook his head slowly. "No, Lucy. You saved me." The truth of those words settled over him like a warm blanket. All these years he'd been drowning in regret, unable to forgive himself for abandoning Tommy and his mother. But through Lucy, he'd found a way to make things right, to be the father he should have been all along. They sat together in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun painting the room in soft golden hues. Lucy nestled against his chest, and Jimmy stroked her hair, feeling a profound sense of peace he'd never known before. The mistakes of his past would always be there, but they no longer had the power to haunt him. In their place was something new and precious, hope, love, and the chance to be the father this little girl deserved. For the first time in years, Jimmy felt truly at home, not just in this house, but in his own skin. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Lucy by his side, he knew he could face whatever came their way. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Jimmy flipped pancakes on the griddle. Lucy sat at the small wooden table, her legs swinging back and forth as she carefully colored in her school workbook. The peaceful quiet was broken only by the soft scratch of her pencil and the sizzle of breakfast cooking. "Almost ready, kiddo," Jimmy said, stacking the golden brown pancakes on a plate. His hands, once used for fighting, now moved with gentle precision as he cut fresh strawberries into tiny pieces. Just the way Lucy liked them. Lucy looked up from her work, her face brightening. "Can I have extra syrup today?" "Just a little extra," Jimmy smiled, placing the plate in front of her. He watched as she carefully arranged the strawberries into a smiley face on top of her pancakes. These simple moments still amazed him. How natural it felt now, How right. After breakfast, they walked together to the local elementary school. Lucy's small hand fit perfectly in his larger one, and she chatted excitedly about her upcoming science project. Jimmy listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. "And Mrs. Peterson says we can bring our families to see our projects next week," Lucy said, looking up at him hopefully. "Will you come?" Jimmy's heart swelled. "Wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart." At the school gates, Lucy hugged him tight. "Love you, Jimmy," she whispered, before running off to join her friends. Those 3 words, so freely given, still had the power to knock the wind out of him. Later that afternoon, Jimmy sat at his desk in the small motorcycle repair shop he'd opened. The familiar smell of oil and metal surrounded him, but instead of working, he found himself looking at the calendar on the wall. He'd circled several dates: Lucy's science fair, her dance recital, and the upcoming parent-teacher conference. His old life seemed like a distant dream now. The leather jacket that once symbolized his hellsangels membership hung in the back of his closet, rarely worn. The nightmares that used to plague him had become less frequent, replaced by peaceful nights knowing Lucy was safe in the room next door. When Lucy bounded into the shop after school, her backpack bouncing, Jimmy wiped his hands on a rag and listened as she excitedly shared her plans for the summer. "Can we go camping?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope. "Tommy used to tell me stories about camping with you." Jimmy paused, remembering those trips with his son, but this time, the memories didn't bring the usual sharp pain. Instead, they felt like precious gifts he could now share with Lucy. "Sure can," he said, ruffling her hair. "We'll go to that same lake where Tommy and I used to fish. I'll teach you how to cast a line." Lucy beamed, then grew serious. "Jimmy, are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at this little girl who had changed everything, who had given him a second chance at being a father, at being a better man. The weight of guilt and regret that had burdened him for so long felt lighter now, replaced by something else. Hope. "Yeah, Lucy," he said softly. "I'm happier than I've been in a very long time." She nodded, satisfied, and pulled out her homework. Jimmy watched her for a moment, marveling at how this small person had helped him find his way back to the light. In caring for Lucy, in keeping his promise to Tommy, he'd found more than redemption. He'd found peace. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Jimmy's kitchen as he flipped pancakes on the griddle. Lucy sat at the table, her legs swinging freely beneath her chair, humming a tune she'd learned at school. The peaceful domesticity of the scene still amazed him sometimes. "Can I have extra syrup today?" Lucy asked, her eyes bright with hope. "Please?" Jimmy tried to keep his face stern, but a smile tugged at his lips. "Just a little extra. Don't want you bouncing off the walls at school." She giggled, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth. 2 years ago, he would never have imagined his life could be like this, full of morning routines, packed lunches, and bedtime stories. The leather jacket that once defined him now hung in the closet, replaced by comfortable flannel shirts and the occasional "World's Best Dad" t-shirt that Lucy had insisted on buying him. As he placed the stack of pancakes in front of her, Jimmy watched her dig in with enthusiasm. Her dark hair was neatly braided, a skill he'd mastered after countless YouTube tutorials, and her school uniform was pressed and clean. She looked nothing like the scared, dirty little girl he'd found crying at Tommy's grave. "You're getting better at making them round," Lucy said between bites, gesturing at the pancakes with her fork. "Remember when they used to look like funny shapes?" Jimmy chuckled, remembering his early attempts at cooking. "Yeah, well, practice makes perfect, kiddo." After breakfast, as Lucy gathered her backpack and lunchbox, Jimmy caught his reflection in the window. The hard lines of his face had softened somewhat, though the tattoos and scars remained, reminders of a different life. But now, when people saw him walking hand in hand with Lucy, they didn't cross the street anymore. Sometimes they even smiled. "Ready for school?" he asked, grabbing his keys. Lucy nodded, then paused. "Can we visit Daddy Tommy's grave after school today? I want to tell him about my art project." Jimmy's heart squeezed in his chest. "Of course we can, sweetheart." The drive to school was filled with Lucy's chatter about her friends and teachers. Jimmy listened, still amazed at how naturally she'd adapted to their new life. The past year had been full of changes, moving to a better neighborhood, enrolling in a good school, making legitimate business connections through his custom motorcycle repair shop. As he pulled up to the school, Lucy leaned over and gave him a quick hug. "Love you, Dad," she said, then hopped out of the truck. Jimmy watched her skip up the steps, joining her friends. "Love you too," he whispered, though she was already out of earshot. Driving back home, he thought about Tommy. His son would be proud of the life they'd built, of how they'd overcome the darkness that had threatened to consume them both. The guilt that had once eaten away at him had transformed into something else, a determination to honor Tommy's memory by being the best father he could be to Lucy. His phone buzzed with a text from Lucy's teacher, confirming next week's parent-teacher conference. Jimmy smiled, remembering how nervous he'd been at the first one. Now he was just another dad, discussing grades and activities like everyone else. The house felt different when he walked in, lived in, loved. Lucy's artwork decorated the walls, her toys scattered in organized chaos throughout the living room. Photos of their little family lined the mantel. Lucy's first day of school, their camping trip last summer, the two of them covered in flour during a failed baking experiment. Jimmy picked up his favorite photo, Lucy sitting on his shoulders at the county fair, both of them laughing. It captured everything he'd never known he needed: joy, innocence, and the purest kind of love. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.